Hey friends, welcome to the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast. I am so happy to be here today. This is actually like a fangirl moment for me. I am so excited to welcome Tami Pyfer from the Dignity Index. Welcome, Tami.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I am sorry if this is the highlight of your day. You need to get out more.
No.
Yes, you do.
No. So just a little bit of context for people. I am a PTA member, and last year I went to the National PTA Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C. And that is an opportunity for PTA members to connect with their national lawmakers. And then National PTA also puts on a conference. So we get to, learn. And this was actually the first one I'd ever been to. And so while I'm kind of like meandering and like looking at the schedule, I see this one that like really kind of piques my interest. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. The Dignity Index. Like, And I walk in and there you are standing up there and you like start going. And I was sold. I was like, this is incredible. Also, fun fact, as I like read your last name, I was like, I know a Pyfer. And so I came up to you afterwards and I was like, hey, do you know? And you were like, yeah, that's my nephew. And I was like, oh my gosh, we were in New Hampshire
right.
together.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. It's a very small world.
Yeah. So that was like my way of like connecting with you so you could remember me that way when I emailed you later and was like, hey, remember me? I'm that lady that you were like, oh yeah. That was like intentional. I wanted you to remember me.
Well, it worked because here I am. Here
you are in my podcast. Now, the other thing I want to say before we kind of like dive into this stuff is that I was talking to So today, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be about a month or so past. But today was the annual convention for Idaho PTA. Yeah. So you're in Idaho because the Idaho PTA invited you to come to Idaho and speak for the very first time and talk about the Dignity Index and like what it means. And I'm so excited to dive into all of those things. And I'm so excited that Idaho PTA brought that. And there were a couple of other associations that came specifically to listen to you.
Nice.
Because they want to bring what your nonprofit is sharing to their organizations. And I'm so excited for that. I'm so excited for Idaho. And I want to tell you that when this was all said and done, I was sitting there at the end and talking to some of the state leaders. One of the state leaders, I won't say who she is, but she said, she's like, oh my gosh, just so you know, the Dignity Index was incredible. And just so you know, it's the only reason my mom came to volunteer today. And I was like, wait, what? And she was like, yeah, my mom's a total fangirl and just like loves the whole thing. And when she found out the Tami Pyfer and the Dignity Index was coming, she came specifically for that. And I was like, hell yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, well, that's, the thing about the Dignity Index is that it just really seems to spark something in people. I think people are starving for something different. And when they hear about this little tool, this very quick, easy on one card tool, it just gets them thinking a different way, going, wait, maybe this could work. Maybe this could help get us out of where we are. And so I have to deflect any of the fangirling because what people really, I think, are doing is they're attracted to the index and the language of the index. I think it's just something that we all need and want, and are in the language of my colleague Tim Shriver always says we're starving for this.
Yes. And that's what I will say is when I first saw you present, one of the things that I did my master's like several years ago, and it was on adult organizational learning and leadership. And in kind of like the culminating project for me was a kind of a look at this group in my community that was confronting incivility. And so it was super fascinating because not only did I get an opportunity to kind of observe like a master's student, but then I got to be a part of it and watch this unfold in my community. Something had happened in the newspaper, and there was some just, I think, decades of friction between the community members and also some tribal members that were kind of like on the outside, just like border the town. And so there was some stuff that happened in the newspaper, and these guys saw it and they said, you know what? we need to address this. And so I got to kind of like watch this unfold, and I used the how to have crucial conversations kind of framework as, the overlay for this project. And I loved it. It like spoke my language. And so one of the things that like I have talked about with people over the last several years, probably last, gosh, when did I get that? That was so like 6 or 7 years, was that, conflict is not bad.
Right.
And it is actually, conflict can be incredible. Conflict exists everywhere. It exists in marriage and relationships and schools and communities. And I think it's when we can work through that conflict, we can get to that beautiful thing that we've created together. So I had that already as like a frame in my mind. And then as I was watching you discuss this scale of 1 to 8 and what this meant, and like I walked away and I told a friend, I was like, oh my gosh, what I have taken away from this is that there is an incredible tool. And also it's like it's like putting thoughts and feelings to words.
Right.
And someone came up to me after convention today and she was like, I realize that I have had contempt for this family member. And she's like, I've never been able to name it. And I finally named it today. And she's like, I now realize that I can work through this thing with my family member because I have this. And I was like, yes, like hallelujah.
That is the magic really of the Dignity Index, is that it gives us language to describe. We call it mindsets. This is the mindset I have. I'm better than you are. You don't belong. Or yeah, we both share these values and let's work together. And they're really, really simple. But as I talk about in my presentation, I always, I'm like a nice person. I got along with a lot of people. I was an elected official for 12 years. I always responded to my constituents. I had all kinds of people who just really supported me and said what a great job I did. But when I saw the language as we created the Dignity Index, I realized that even if I didn't say some of these things out loud, that my first go-to in a lot of arguments or a lot of disagreements was on the contempt side of the scale. It was a 4 often. It's like, we're better than those people. They don't get it. They don't understand. And if the conflict was pretty intense, I would often think they're ruining everything. I would never, again, necessarily say that out loud, but it doesn't matter. Because if that's my go-to mindset, and if I think you're ruining everything, the odds of me trying to have an open conversation and come up with a creative solution to a problem with someone who's ruining everything is pretty low.
Yeah.
If I automatically assume that you don't want what's best for, the city, you don't want what's best for our school because you're ruining everything, then I shut off the opportunity to come up with creative solutions. And so that's what the index helped me see in myself. And again, it can be kind of painful when we see ourselves there, but it's also, it's enlightening. And even in, my colleagues, our work group, that we'll get talking. It happened this week. And I said something, didn't even think twice about it. And there was this long pause. And my colleague said, so like you're saying that in 4 language, right? I mean, like you're 4 right now. Do you, right? I mean, is that what you're trying to tell us? And we all laughed. And I said, actually, I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, that is, I didn't mean that. And I say that just because we all catch each other, right? And the index is not meant to be used as a stick. And it's not meant for me to hold you accountable all the time. If we're working together, we're going to talk about it. We are going to hold each other accountable. But it's meant to hold ourselves accountable so that we look back. We call it the mirror effect, and we look at ourselves.
Yeah.
And this meeting this week, it made me laugh because I was getting super passionate about something, and I didn't even think about it until there was the pause. It's like, Tammy's a 4 right now. Okay,
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that it allows, I think what I have observed in this is that it gives people an opportunity, like a framework, to be able to confront what is there. Because so often what I hear people say is that like, I'm self-aware, I'm aware. But what I have learned from people is that awareness is different than confronting what is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That awareness is, okay, I see these things, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And I also don't necessarily really want to look in that mirror because I might not really enjoy what I see
Right.
in my reflection.
Right.
So that mirror effect, really, it takes a lot of courage to look in the mirror and confront what is there and then address it.
One of the cool things we've found with the index related to exactly what you're saying is that when we use contempt, it's hard to see it. Well, that's not me. When we use contempt, it's hard to see it. But when you see it in yourself, it becomes hard to use it. And that's the mirror effect, because now I see it. The index helps me put words and language to it. Now that I see it, it becomes really hard to use.
Yeah. Yes. So what I want to do actually is, before we take this deep dive into what the index is, I want to understand how you got here. Because I love a good journey. I love a good story, Tami. I'm sorry. I just really do. I love a good story. And you have had like a really cool background, and you expressed some of that today in your presentation, which I think I think the context like really matters. So I would love to hear what led up to becoming a part of this work. Like, what do you feel like those things were, and like what in your in your life's journey do you feel like were moments that like helped you build on like who you are and like what got you to this point?
Well, I'll try not to take too long on some of the early pieces, but I do feel like a lot of my time in my undergraduate and graduate programs in special education helped me put a framework to things like, how do you change behavior? How do you get from A to B without knowing the content? If I want to change my own behavior, I'm going to have to recognize it. I'm going to have to task analyze a behavior. Then I'm going to have to do steps along the way to change that behavior. Think of young children, or especially special ed students that maybe have an IEP. It's like, how do we get them from A to B? And there's this work involved in that. I learned how to do that. I learned how to see what the outcome was that we wanted to achieve, and then how to break that down to get to that outcome. So I believe that my work in special education, then I taught at Utah State for 10 years in that field, that helped me. And then I was on the city council. There was a problem in our neighborhood, like a lot of people that run for public office. So I'm going to solve that problem. And then you get involved, and it's like, hey, like an average person, a mom with 5 kids at home can make a difference. And I learned the process of planning and zoning in particular, and got involved, and people said, you should run for city council. It's like, oh, I could never do that. I don't like conflict because I hate conflict. I was very conflict avoidant. And they said, no, you've got a knack for this. And so I ran for city council and lost. And then I ran again and won, and ran again and won. And I served 8 years at the local level, and then 4 years on the state school board. But what I found in my city council work was kind of what you described with conflict and problem solving. It was so cool to bring all these pieces together and all these people together and get ideas back and forth and see that, wow, we can make a difference. If I bring people in and I teach them how this works, and we all band together, we can make a difference. That was really exciting for me. And there were some really tough times too. I remember my husband said, you're not the woman I married. He said, I married someone that would flee from any conflict, any contention. You didn't want to get into an argument. You would leave the room if things got heated. And he says, now you're sitting there in front of the council and going, bring it on. We're going to talk about this budget. Why did we go over budget? Okay, let's talk about this. And he said, you were not afraid to bring up these really difficult conversations. And I don't know that I became less afraid. I just had better tools. And then you start to have experiences where you're having success and you're seeing things happen in your community that are good things. And I loved bringing people together to make that happen. Not me necessarily, but bringing the people together. And then so I put a lot of stock in those experiences. And then when I was on the state school board, lots of very difficult issues. Wow, a lot of difficult issues. And I learned to see things differently. but then I think the biggest thing that I think has helped me in my work is my time spent with the governor in Utah, Governor Herbert. I was his education policy advisor for 7 years. And his philosophy, really, you see his philosophy in what we do. I'll have to tell you this experience. When I was first hired, the legislative session had just started, and you don't like apply for this job. You get a call, the governor would like to see you. So okay. And so within, a couple of weeks, I'm leaving my university job. I'm in the governor's office. I'm in the executive meeting. There's like 12 of us, and we're talking about legislation. And the governor started to ask us about an education bill. What do you think? What do you think, Tami? I want to hear what Tami thinks. So I told him what I thought, and he said, well, I think differently. I think it's this, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, but that's not really how it works, Governor. Like, I'm on the state board, like I've been seeing this up close and personal. This is actually how that works. And he said, well, I disagree. And we started to kind of go back and forth. And I remember looking around the table and people were kind of looking down at their shoes, here's the new girl. And it didn't get like out of hand or anything, but it did get like several exchanges where I'm pushing back, he's pushing back. And when the meeting was over, I remember getting up to go to my office, and the governor said, Tami, I need to see you in my office. I thought, this is the shortest job I have ever had. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I'm good. And luckily, I was commuting to Salt Lake. We hadn't sold our house or anything. And I got in his office, and he said, Tami, don't ever stop pushing back on me. He said, if I can't win an argument with you, I don't have a very good argument. And I need to understand these issues. You know things I don't know. I know things you don't know. So I want to have these conversations. I want you to feel like you can push back on me. And I'm like, okay, so you just gave me the green light, Governor Herbert, And he said, that's good. He said, but in the end, when I make a decision, I need to know you're with me. I said, absolutely. If we can have these conversations, and I know I've given you all of the information and we have debated and argued in a good way, and you make a decision, I will totally back you. And that became that was my reputation in the office, right? They had like a rule that I found out about a couple years later, that I was not allowed to see the governor within like an hour when he had a public appearance, because we would argue about something. And they say, oh, no, you're not allowed in there, Tami. I was like, wait, this is real? It's the Tami rule. You are not allowed in the governor's office. Because we would just have these really robust. But what I learned from that was that he was not afraid. In fact, he welcomed the conflict. And there would often be people that disagreed with us. And he'd say, Tami, I need you to meet with so-and-so. And I'd go, Governor, like, they don't even like you. He said, I know. I said, well, why am I meeting with them? Well, because they don't like this bill, and I know you support the bill, and I need you to find out why they don't like it. And once I said, Governor, they are talking crap about you on the radio. What are we? He said, even more so, the reason that I need you to go meet with them, I need you to find out, what is this disagreement about? And he had this way about, getting people together to try and find the best solution. Again, a lot of what I learned there, I brought to our work at the Dignity Index. So that's the longest part of the story. When he finished his term in 2020, and I finished working, with him those 7 years. I had met Tim Shriver. He's the chair of Special Olympics, and he had been in Salt Lake to speak the year before at a luncheon for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, I believe. And he talked about this new kind of a movement, or this new initiative that he was trying to build. They didn't quite know what it was yet, but he says, we've got to do something different in the country. And they were looking to apply some of these social and emotional learning skills, like disagreeing better, being able to disagree without being disagreeable, being able to have conflict resolution skills, being able to work with diverse groups, things that they teach in school. He said, what if we applied that to politics? And it was just like, it was one of those moments that you never forget. I know where I was sitting. I know where I was standing. I know what the slide looked like. I took a picture of it, and I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I met with Tim after that, and he came to Utah and did a conference for us. And we just kept talking about this idea that he had. And what are you doing after the governor's office? And maybe you should come, work with us. And you bring what you've learned. And so that began my experience and association with Tim and our other colleague, Tom Roschert. At our nonprofit is called Unite, but in 2021, then we started to build the Dignity Index, bringing Tim's background in Special Olympics and treating everyone with dignity because of all of his years, and seeing the lessons we can learn from people with intellectual disabilities and people who are often seen as being on the margins, and yet can be our greatest teachers. And he brought that to the table. I brought my work with the governor and Tom Roschert, a talented writer. He worked in the Clinton administration as a writer, thinker, scholar. So between the three of us from really diverse backgrounds, we started working on this Dignity Index, and here we are.
I love it. That's so cool. All of those things that you talk about. I love that, like, it just sounds like everything just kind of built on the thing before it.
Yeah.
And that someone said to me once, and I really love it, like, what is meant for you will not pass you by. And that happens to resonate with me. And when you talk about being in this place and hearing Tim Shriver speak, and like where you're talking about, like, I know the moment, I remember all the things, that moment, seizing that opportunity, creating that connection with that person, and then building this thing, with the three of you, and knowing that, like, there was something there and continuing to have those conversations, I just think is so cool. And before, like, again, sorry, one more thing before we kind of like dive into these, this scale of 8 things. There was something that you said today that was so profound to me because, and I heard you say it a year ago, it was part of your presentation then, because it resonates with me being a part of a family that has like different political, backgrounds. And like, I have had an experience recently where I acknowledge that I really do feel like I was trying to engage on, like a 5.
Okay, good.
Like a 5, and kind of knowing where this person was coming from, but really feeling like this person was offering me like a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it's like in this place of family members and politics, I think sometimes there is a fear of re-engaging because people are just like, I mean, I can appreciate that when someone's unkind so many times, it's like, I'm going to pass on that. I don't want to go there, right? Like, I don't want to go there.
Right.
But the thing that I loved was the picture that you showed of your family. Like, do you mind sharing about that?
Yeah.
You don't have to give names or anything.
Yeah,
but
no,
like,
we've got 5 kids, 5 adult kids, and 16 grandkids. I would lose my grandma card if I didn't tell you I have 16 grandkids now. But we have 5 adult kids. They're all married, and they belong or associate to 5 different political parties. We've got a Republican, an Independent, Democrat, Democratic Socialist, and a Libertarian. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's like I always thought that was a parenting win. It was kind of fun to see, and we would have Thanksgiving or whatever, and everyone would say, no, that's not it. And we would have these really robust discussions that, because of what's surrounding us in society, turned toxic. And, kind of 2015, 16, 17, people have watched that kind of happen over the last decade. It's been about a decade. And all of a sudden, it's not fun anymore. And it's not, those robust discussions just don't happen at all. In fact, politics is off the table for a lot of families. And we've had a couple of years where it is off the table. Let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when it was robust and we were having all these discussions, I felt like it was coming from each of us individually and what we were learning about, politics and our role and our place in society. And that's what made it cool. And then in the last decade, I feel like it's the outside forces, not us discovering and experiencing who we want to be, but it's the outside society telling us, oh, no, actually, this is who you are. If you're a Republican, this is who you are. If you're a Democrat, this is who you are. And those labels that are being put on us from outside forces is what we are now seeing. We see it everywhere. It's the first question I'm going to try and get answered. I might not ask you outright, but I want to find out whose side you're on, right? That's what society is telling us. And so that's when I think we started to lose that thread and stop looking at, my kids, looking at each other, looking at my husband and I as individuals with like these political views. But it's tough. It's tough for a lot of people. In fact, I didn't realize how much my family story resonated with people until I started making these presentations. And without exception, someone will come up to me afterwards and say, "That's my family. You just described exactly what we're going through." And I think it makes our work even more relevant, because breaking up with a neighbor is one thing, right? Or your water cooler discussions at work go away, that's one thing. But breaking up with your family, no, it's just not right. It's not right.
Yeah. One of the things that you said in terms of like your family, and I was sitting there thinking, well, and I actually don't know if like you actually said these words, but the thought that I grabbed a hold of as you were talking was this idea that like, as a mom, here you are, and you have like 5 independent thinkers. And the thing that I love about that is that what that tells me is that all 5 of those kids were allowed to develop into who they are, what's inside of them. And mom and dad weren't trying to control them into this way of thinking.
Yep.
And my oldest is he has different views than me. And one of the things that I learned when he was like 13 and 14 was that I was going to have to I was going to have to learn some new ways as a parent to engage with him so that we could have this relationship that I really wanted.
Yeah.
And so I learned pretty early on then with him what we did in the family was like focus on core values, right? Like, hey, we both agree on self-improvement and growth and developing, right? Kind of those core values are what connected us. And so now like he's off in college, and when he comes home or like on the phone, we often do not agree. But we can still have these incredible conversations because we both know that we're showing up at the table in a way that says, like, I love you because you're you. And you might think differently than me, and I want to learn from you because I don't think the way that you do.
That's exactly right.
And so that's something that really resonated with me today as you were talking, that it's like, and even in our, like our families, our communities, we need people who think differently than us. I will tell you right now, the world would not be fantastic if everyone was like Alexis Morgan, like thinking like me. Like I need people who think differently. Yeah. And so that's something else that I like love about the Dignity Index. And as my teachers would say, okay, mom, you've like done a lot of glazing. Have you heard this term? Teenagers talk about glazing. Like, oh, you're glazing it. And it's basically just giving so many compliments, like over, like, just like a lot, like, oh, like, so they call it glazing. I love it. My teenagers have been teaching me this term, like, okay, mom, you've given a lot of glazing. So let's dive into it. Sure. Let's dive into the Dignity Index. Share the basic premise of this.
Okay, so the index is a scale. It goes from 1 to 8. And this we came to that number 1 to 8 through some trial and error. It was a 7-point scale. Then I said, well, it should be a 10-point scale. It's easier to remember. But as we actually started to do the work of validating the scale and testing the reliability of the scale, it turned out to be 8 points. And the bottom 4 levels on the scale are the contempt side of the scale. The top 4 levels are the dignity side of the scale. And what the scale does, the index measures the language that we use. It also kind of has the mindset behind the language, but it's the language that we use in moments of disagreement, anger, when we're hurt. I have discovered this lately more than ever, is when we're hurt, I often go to the scale. It's like I often go to the contempt. It's like, you hurt me? Okay. You're dead to me, right? I mean, I'm going to the contempt side of the scale. But and so it measures that language that we use. And if you start at a 4, which is the middle of the scale, and start to work your way down, you'll see increasing levels of contempt. until you get to the bottom of the scale. If you start at a 5 and go up, you see increasing levels of dignity. Our tagline for the index is that we want to ease divisions, prevent violence, and solve problems. That's the whole purpose of this, is to ease our divisions. And as we started to develop the scale, it's like, well, not only does this ease divisions, but this is a problem-solving tool. This is a conflict resolution tool. And when you can do this, you are going to prevent the violence that we are seeing crop up more and more often with the political violence and the political rhetoric. So that's kind of the basic of the scale. I'm happy to walk through each of the steps if you want. Tell me what you'd like to hear.
Yeah. So first, tell me, what does contempt mean and what does dignity mean?
Okay. So we built the first foundations of the index on we looked a lot at two authors who we had read, Dr. Arthur Brooks, who had written a book called Love Your Enemies. This, I think, was in 2019, and wrote about polarization. But he really honed in on contempt. It's the contempt. It's not that we disagree. It's that we hate people we disagree with. We treat them with contempt. And that is saying, I'm better than you. I know better than you. I'm smarter than you. You don't get it. You don't belong. I do. That's contempt. We look down on people.
Fun fact, Arthur Brooks came to Boise in like 21, 22, and he went to Boise State and was at the Morrison Center, and that auditorium was filled.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like an hour-long presentation, and I could have listened to him longer, but he was essentially, that was like one of the things, what you're talking
His
about.
message.
Yeah, that's what he spoke about.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry.
And it makes so much sense when you hear it, though, right? And again, when we use contempt, we don't think we're doing it. We think it's everyone else. But then you start to learn about it. It's like, oh, crap, that is me.
Yeah.
So that's the contempt definition. Dignity, on the very opposite end of the scale. We read the work of Dr. Donna Hicks. So she's an international conflict resolution specialist who spent 2.5 decades working all over the world. She worked in Northern Ireland and South Africa. She worked with Bishop Desmond Tutu. She was solving conflict, mediating these really intractable problems with groups that hated each other. And Bishop Tutu asked her once, "What have you learned? What's the key to this?" And she said, "It's dignity. It's dignity. And what you're seeing is what happens when people's dignity is violated." And he asked her to write a book about it. She did, and Bishop Tutu wrote the foreword to the book. But it's all about dignity. And so we started to look at, well, if contempt is, increasing the polarization, and Donna learned how to solve these terrible problems with dignity, that's the scale. That's what we should be measuring in our speech. And I always bring up the mindset behind the speech, but it's contempt then all the way to dignity.
So I know that I heard you say part of this, and I don't know if I've pieced this together and things that I've heard from you or whatnot, but when I am talking about this idea of dignity, and I've heard people say like, well, I don't respect their their perspective. And so it's this, for me, it's respect is earned, dignity is offered.
That's right. Dignity is inherent. So different religions have language to, that talk about the inherent or divine worth of individuals. Non-religious entities, we talk about just that you're a human being, so you have inherent worth because you're sharing the planet with me. And you have dignity. I can't give it to you. I can't take it away from you. You have it. I cannot treat you with dignity, but you're not born with inherent respect. That's not a given. People earn the respect of others. And so there is a difference there, just like we also talk about civility versus dignity, right? That's a different level. And we think dignity is just the highest level of treating people with that humanity that they are born with, that they come to this planet with.
And that is something that I know in my community recently, there has been this little bit of, I think a lot of conflict. And what is interesting to me is that like right now, they have yet to have people sit down at the table to have this conversation, because what has been observed in the news is almost this perspective of, well, the people who made these particular choices to begin with they must not love kids. They must,
Right.
right? Kind of this demonizing, this contempt towards them. And it's like, no, that's not true. They just, and so, the opposite side then in a very, I wouldn't even say the opposite side, a group of people who wanted to express that they wanted to show dignity towards the students went to a place of, well, everyone is welcome.
That's
right? Wanting to show that we all, in the language that I use, is that we all have value and our flaws do not diminish our value. And so I do have flaws.
Wait, stop.
Yeah. What?
I'm done.
Yeah. I have flaws. And so for example, I'm going to go back to my son. What he and I have done together is that he has, like in our boundaries and working together, all those things, is that he knows that even in my flaws, we can show up because ultimately I do want to offer him dignity because I do value him and I do see him as a human being. And so like, I remember I was sitting across from my husband's uncle, like somewhat recently, and he was like, he and I have some similar political perspectives and we have some very different ones. And he looked at me and asked me what for him I felt like was such a sincere and hard thing to ask because he knew I was probably not going to say what he agreed with. But he was curious and he wanted to know my perspective. And I was like, wow, I actually really respect someone who is curious and wants to offer, like that's how in my mind, like that's one way that I feel like I engage with, the concept of respect.
Yeah.
Anyways, all of that to say that I think that there is this, for me, to your point, we all have inherent value. And I don't agree with a lot of things, but that doesn't mean I don't treat someone like a human being.
Right. And Alexis, we're at a disadvantage right now in this time because we can have this conversation, you can have it with your husband's uncle, and we can have these sincere questions, but the environment surrounding us, Arthur Brooks calls it the industrial outrage complex. The outrage industrial complex. Sorry, I didn't get that right. The outrage industrial complex, which is media, traditional social media. People are trying to get us to hate each other because there are people and systems making a lot of money off of us hating each other. So we can be struggling the best we can to not go there and to be open and have these conversations. And yet we're surrounded by forces and media and context that's telling us how horrible you are. And it's really hard to completely shut ourselves off from that. It's there. And part of our movement is to get people to see contempt, to get people to see what it does so that they can say, oh, okay, I get it now. I am not part of that anymore. A politician's going to send me an email asking for money, and if they use contempt, sorry, I just scored your email and it's a 2. You just said that those people are ruining everything. Please send me $25. You're not getting any money from me. Send me your message worded a different way. I want to know what you're going to do. I don't want you to just call the other side evil. What if you had 1,000 people in your voting district that did that? What if you had 10,000 people in a state, in a Senate race that said, yeah, I'm not going to buy that anymore. I will not participate in contempt anymore. So we want to shift the culture by developing constituencies, and not just political, but constituencies that don't tune into that podcast anymore. Because all they do in this podcast is talk about how evil the other side is. I'm not going to watch that television show anymore. I am not going to subscribe to this newsletter anymore because I'm tired of the contempt. It's a huge, ambitious dream, but it can happen. And it starts with smaller subcultures is what we like to think about. What if all the PTA ladies in Idaho, and then all the PTA ladies and dads, I shouldn't leave the men out, in Utah. What if PTA were the driving force and they said, we're done with contempt. We're not going to support this. And I'm going to pledge to not be part of that system. And in my subculture of PTA, or my subculture of public education, or my subculture of whatever the subculture, your work environment, I've got these people around me and we've decided we're not part of that anymore. And then you start to see people on social media and you see our 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. Note shameless plugging that we need more than that. But you start to see the movement grow, and then you realize you're part of a movement, and you are making a difference. And you start to have politicians speak to you differently. You start to have podcasters speak to you differently, and start to try to win your votes with dignity and not contempt. And that's how you start to shift the larger culture, is by shifting those smaller cultures.
Okay, I'm in. Like, I can be your person for Idaho.
Thank you. Done.
Yeah. So let's go into the scale a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Tell me about the scale.
So did I get all let me just try and go each of the steps.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
No, you haven't done
that
yet.
I get really passionate about this stuff. So a 4 is the first step into contempt. And I want to say, because sometimes I word this wrong just because I'm in the moment. We don't score people, but we score language.
It's such an important distinction to make.
In my, what I said earlier, like when we're in our work meetings and I say something, it's like, oh, Tami, you're being a 4. What they mean is you're using 4 language, right? But it's with my close friends and we get it. But we don't score people, we score speech. Because at any given moment, we watched a political speech from last week. From a very popular politician. He was a 2, and then he was a 7, and then he was a 5. We can be anywhere on that scale in any conversation at any time. So we score language and not people. So at a 4, the language that we're using, the mindset behind it is we're better than those people. You don't belong. They're not one of us. And think about instances where you have felt like you don't belong. That is one of my really difficult things that I'm trying to overcome, is this feeling that I don't belong. And when people intentionally make you feel like you don't belong, it's so hurtful. And when we do that to other groups, it's like, you don't belong here. We're better than you. That's a 4. That's the first step into contempt. That's the most common contempt score that we see kind of in an everyday situation. And that's the one where people just don't realize they're doing it.
Is that an us versus them, or okay?
Yeah, yeah. It's the beginning of us versus them. It's like, we're better than you, so we're not explicitly saying us versus them, but we're better than you. So I don't really need to talk to you. 3 is when you're starting to say, yeah, it's us versus them.
Okay,
we're better than you. We're the good people. You're the bad people. It really is us versus them when you get to the 3, and then when you get to a 2, it's not us versus them. It's us or them. Not only are you the good people and you're the bad people, but you're evil. And you're going to ruin everything. You're going to destroy this country if we let you. You're going to destroy public education. You're destroying my community. When we started scoring fundraising emails 2 years ago, it was almost verbatim, no matter which side you are looking at, they're ruining the country. Like, that phrase was in so many fundraising emails. And it was so funny because it's like, they're ruining the country. Send me $25. It's like, how many years do I have to send you $25? You have not saved the country yet. Yeah. But that's when you're starting to kind of stir up this idea of violence, because if they're destroying the country, then we better do something. And that's when you drop to the bottom of the scale, which is they're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them before they destroy us.
Yikes.
And we see this language. We saw it last year. We scored the political or the presidential races. And
I loved that. I was like, I'm telling you right now. And one of the things that I loved about it was that it was across the board.
Yeah, it's across the board. Yeah, people, and that's, again, when you use contempt, you don't see it. It's like, well, my side doesn't use it, but boy, I'm watching those other people. Man, they're horrible. And then when you start to see what that language looks like, and then you go, oh, actually, my side uses it too. And that's when we feel like there's almost this instant reaction, like, I don't want to be that, because I just told you how much I hate the other side. I don't want to be that. So that's the bottom of the scale. The 5 is the first step into dignity. And that's when you can say, look, the other side has a right to be here and a right to be heard. It's their country too. Sometimes I think of it as, you do you, live and let live. It's all good. You belong here too. 6 is when you're trying to find that common ground. We always talk to the other side. We want to look for those values and interests that we share so that we can build on them. And when I was first on the city council, this was my strategy, right? It's like, who wants to build a new dog park? Yeah. Like, I want to help you. I want to help you. Oh yeah, we all want to do that. Let's do that together, which is fantastic. If you can get, political leaders and other leaders that do that and find those things you have in common, that's fantastic. You acknowledge the other side. You enjoy working with people that are different, that have different views than you do. A 7, though, takes it up another level, which is not only do I want to work with people that think like me, but I'm going to really look for those people that don't think like I do. I want to find out why we think so differently on an issue. And it's not necessarily how on earth can you think so differently, but tell me why you think so differently. Mm-hmm. What stories do you have that brought you to this place? And when you start to hear the stories of individuals, I would hear this a lot on the city council and on the school board when people would get to come and do our public comment. It's like they had really great reasons and great ideas. And so if you get to a 7 and you're listening, you realize that it may be not about finding common ground, but finding higher ground. I've heard that said before. I didn't originate that phrase, but I love it so much because when you're trying to find common ground and you don't find it, then it's kind of like, okay, we're done here. But when you know that you don't have common ground, and so you're going to look for those things you disagree on, then that opens up your mind to start looking for higher ground. And you might say, you know what, I could have been wrong there. Or I see what you're saying now. Oh, now I know why you're so adamant. And you might change your mind. A lot of people tell me that they shy away from a 7 because they don't want to give up their principle. Oh, I don't want to have to say I was wrong. Right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's like Dr. Adam Grant says in his book, Think Again. Have you read that one? Okay. I love that one. He says, we change fashion all the time. Like just, every year, fads come and go. Yep. And we change our fashion, but people want to hold on to those political beliefs from 1995. Mm-hmm. They don't want to rethink. They don't. And so 7, I mean, to me, it's that willingness to rethink about something. Right. And he even said I think he was being interviewed by Brene Brown at one point, and they were talking about one of his first books, which is called The Original. Mm-hmm. That's when I was first introduced to him. I really, really like that book. He said, I've gone back and looked at that and I have changed my mind on one of the chapters. I think beautiful. And I was like, that is amazing.
Yeah. Well, and when you get to the 7, again, people say, I can't give that up. This is what I believe. And it's like, don't give up what you believe in. You hang on to your principle. We want you to hold on to your principles, your values, your passion. If you really want to put forward your ideas, we're going to show you a different way to do that. Mm-hmm. And calling people stupid and idiots and evil is not going to help you. This is what's going to help you. There's a great quote that we've scored that I use in some of my presentations by Benjamin Franklin, and it's the night of the Constitutional Convention when they were getting ready to pass it and sign it. And he has he had this whole speech that he was too sick eventually to give, and someone read it for him. But he said, I used to think I knew that. I'm going to paraphrase badly. It was like, I used to think I knew what was right here. And I thought I was really sure of this until I started to listen to other people. And now the older I get, the more I realize that I'm not so sure anymore. I think I might be wrong. And at the end of his speech, he's basically just asking people to get together, take a chance. We might change it, but I used to be sure, and now I'm not anymore. So let's all work together on this. And it's like a beautiful 7, an absolute beautiful 7. And a point that I've made before is that we as a people don't let political leaders change their minds. We don't often let them admit they were wrong, because then it's like, oh, those guys are wishy-washy. You are such a flip-flopper, and you're out of office. I can't believe you left us. It's like, well, I got in and I learned more and I saw a different point of view. And I mean, we hope that they will get all of that background information, right? But it's hard to do in these times. And then an 8 is when you can say, look, every one of us is born with inherent worth. So we treat everyone with dignity, no matter what. No matter what you've done. There's a beautiful quote by Bishop Tutu in his book on forgiving that said, look, I have talked with former police officers who have admitted inflicting the cruelest torture. I have visited with child soldiers that have committed acts of depravity. But in them, when I look at them, I see a little bit of myself. I see a mirror of my own humanity in them. So he's not saying, that's okay, you had a rough childhood, we're just going to let you go. It's not saying don't hold people accountable. It's saying we'll hold you accountable, but we will do it with dignity. Mm-hmm. You may be in prison for the rest of your life, but you will be treated like a human being. Mm-hmm. with every accommodation that we can offer to you in that setting. And so that's what the top of the scale is. And so an 8 is aspirational. We all can do it, and we all probably do it more often than we think. The Dignity Index, again, is to help us see that language, see what it looks like, and so that when we start to slip into contempt, we can remember that that's not really, it's not going to help me solve this problem. And that's actually not who I want to be.
Right. So I used to serve on the school board up in the Lewiston, so it's 5 hours north of here. And before I was on the school board had attempted to pass a bond 3 times. Mm. And to me, this is like where the Dignity Index comes in big time in our school community. I mean, so many different places, but here's one in particular. And they had lost 3 times within, I think I'm going to get this wrong, 10, 12 years. It really stung. And the second and third time in particular that they ran that bond, there was an opposition to that bond. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of people who were a no. And so it failed. And in Idaho, you have to have a supermajority to pass. And so what they did in that moment after they lost that third time was they said, we need to understand why people are voting no. So they created this committee, mm-hmm. and they invited people on that committee who had voted no. And so this committee got together and they, worked through different things and talked about different stuff and asked the school board to, look at what it would cost to renovate the current building and what it would cost to build new. Mm-hmm. That's what they needed. The community needed the comparison. And there was someone on the school board who had gotten on the board who was a hard no. He was with the opposition. Mm-hmm. And what that school board did along with that committee was by, I think it was May, because I happened to be at this meeting. I was a community member, May or June of 2026. Excuse me, we're not there yet. 2016. 2016, this trustee who had been a hard no, was the one who made the motion to put forth a brand new bond. Mm. And as I kind of heard different stories after that, because shortly thereafter that that trustee resigned because he was sick, and then a couple people applied for the position. I was one of them, so I got to be on the board. And what I learned from the board, and as I watched these meetings unfold when this committee would come, there was one gentleman in particular, and a board member asked him a question. And basically it was like, what is it about this new building that makes you support it this time, that you haven't supported it? And this was a gentleman who was a craftsman, and he was at the board, in his overalls, kind of Carhartt overalls. And just to me, he presented as a very humble individual. And he was like, I support public education. My grandkids are in this school district, right? So he's giving kind of the background, this foundation of these are my values. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like the proposal from the board really captured the entire community in what we needed here in Lewiston. And so the reason I support it now is because we have a career technical center, the CTE, yeah. And it was regional. And he talked about how it wasn't just going to help kids there, it was going to help kids regionally. And that career tech center, that regional career tech center, as a board member, I believe That was the thing that got us over the finish line. That's the thing that 75% of our community
Yeah.
members said yes. And by the way, that's like unheard of in Idaho to have 75% of the community say yes.
Anywhere. That's
Yes.
really great.
And I truly believe that one of those reasons was because the school district brought in people who thought differently. They wanted to learn, they
Yeah.
wanted to engage, and they wanted to create that higher ground that you
That's
talk
right.
about.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
had some of those experiences when I was on the city council too, where when I was first elected, we have the city, Logan City, and then Cache County. And Logan City had an ambulance system. Cache County had their own, and Cache County surrounds Logan. And for 20 years, I would read in the paper for 20 years, every 3 or 4 years, they'd say, "Why do we have two systems? We should get together." And it would just fail. The discussions would, completely fall apart within a few weeks, sometimes a few months. And that went on for 20 years. And when I was elected, I remember right before I took office, it was like in November, December, I ran into one of my counterparts on the county council. And he said, "Tammy, I don't know if you know." He said, "Of course I know who you are. You've been, an official for a long time." He said, "You and I are going to solve the ambulance problem."
Mm.
And I said, "I'm in." He said, "We're going to do it different, but we have got to solve this problem." So it didn't happen the next year, but my second year, maybe my third year in office, he said, "We're going to solve this problem now." And we took a very different approach. And we pulled in, first of all, we pulled in the decision makers because it was territorial. Logan's paying for all these services. Why should we pay him for the county? And the county's going, it takes ambulances 30 minutes to get here and it's too late. And anyway, we had a small group that worked on it behind closed doors at first, which is not, we had some criticism on transparency, but to be able to get the right feelings out and on the table and talk about things frankly, that's where we had to start. And within, I think it took us maybe 6 or 7 months, pretty soon, we had people seeing things differently. And Logan City, which I was on, it was like, I feel for the county, and the county officials went, I get what you mean about feeling like you're always shouldering all of the cost. And so we ended up with a beautiful countywide ambulance system that was in place for 10 solid years. I think just in the last 2 years, it had grown so much. It had grown so big that they realized that they didn't need that interlocal agreement anymore. And it was this friendly, it's like, thank you. This is what we needed to get to where we are. But I'll never forget one night when I was on the school board. So I had left the city council and I was on the state school board, and I got a call. I was in Salt Lake City getting ready to go to a meeting, and I got a call from that same gentleman who was on the county council. And he said, "Tammy, how are you?" I said, "I haven't talked to you for so long." He said, "I just wanted you to know we saved my granddaughter's life." And I said, "What are you talking about, Daryl? What are you talking about?" He said, "We saved my granddaughter's life." I said, "Okay, tell me what's happening." He said, "Newborn granddaughter, she had a medical issue. They lived out probably 25 minutes from town, maybe 30 minutes." He said, "Because we had that station in Smithfield, they were there in 5 minutes. They saved her life. This makes a difference." And I thought, okay, this is why we do this type of work, where we work through difficult situations, because it means something. And sometimes it means literally saving people's lives, because you've taken your biases off the table. You're not going to blame those people. You're not going to do a 4 and a 3. It's not us versus them anymore. It's us together. How can we solve this problem? And that's what I love about the Dignity Index.
So I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. I got just goosebumps
Yeah.
when you shared that, because it's like, yeah, that is a true example of working through the conflict and creating something beautiful that then like deeply impacted, saved the life of a little girl.
And from that point on, we heard from numerous people that said, "Oh, yeah, my dad had a heart attack. He's the countywide ambulance is the reason he's alive today." And it was just like these stories would pour in, and we're going, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, the impact of working through
Yeah.
that conflict. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just really incredible. So tell me what the Dignity Index is doing nationwide, because you are working to create a movement, and I want to hear about what you're doing.
We are. So we're like on the verge. I feel like we're on the verge of just sort of flooding the flooding social media, flooding different systems. We've got public ed that's interested in this. We've been speaking, I think we're in about 10 states, possibly 12, where the State School Boards Association is picking up on this, and they're adopting the Dignity Index. Some of them are taking the pledge as a group. We're working with municipal governments. There's a group of female elected officials in Utah, mayors and city council members who have adopted the Dignity Index. They say we keep this card on our desk, and we use it when we are in conflict, both internally and with patrons. So we have municipal organizations. We've spoken to the Pennsylvania Municipal Organization. We're going to be in Arizona speaking to their state association. And Maryland, I'm going to be speaking to the Women's Caucus of the Maryland Municipal Association, and my colleague Tim will be keynoting there. We're on higher ed campuses. So last year we piloted this in Colorado Mesa University, and University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, where the Dignity Index is part of the freshman orientation. So every incoming freshman now, I think it was 1,601 and 700 students in the other, they all know this language. It takes about 40 minutes to teach this language, right? Or the scale, 40 minutes to teach the scale. And when you're in a group of 1,600 of your peers and you're all hearing the same thing at the same time, and then when you go out and now all of a sudden, your group's going to start, calling so-and-so names or those people over there, it's kind of like there's this group accountability. It's like, oh, we all know that that's a 4. Yeah. Do we really want to go there? So we're doing freshman orientation. We're working in corporate America. So we've got some contracts now with very large corporations who want dignity to be their corporate culture. So this is completely out of the political range. The school boards and higher ed and the corporate and businesses, they just want their employees to feel like they work in a place where they're valued, where they're treated with dignity, and where they solve problems together. I mean, that's what business is about, is solving problems. And when you can have better recruitment and retention of employees because they feel like they're part of a bigger plan and a bigger success, and they can work on difficult issues without the toxic polarization, even within their corporate structure, they like working there and they're more productive. And so we are in several businesses right now teaching about the Dignity Index. I'm traveling to India next month to work with a corporation that wants to use the Dignity Index, and then I'll be in Israel with a group that wants to hear about the Dignity Index.
I do have to say, I follow you on social media. I see everywhere. Like you pop up on my feed and it's like, well, she's over here while the Dignity Index is over there. Yeah. I mean, I do see that it's spreading.
We want it to be a movement. I think that's part of this movement, is that you need to feel like you're not alone. Mm-hmm. You need to see other places who are getting excited about this, other organizations and other PTAs who have adopted this, because it's like, I'm part of this movement. And we call it a movement. We want people to be engaged in the movement. You'll see soon more intentional work on our social media channels where we want to hear your stories. Mm-hmm. We want to develop some groups of dignity ambassadors.
Hi, I'm over here.
I'm
My
going to say
Alexis.
So that you can come. We'll bring you to Salt Lake. We'll train you. We want to have boot camps and have you trained to be able to go into your area, your subculture. We've got this wonderful group of women in Illinois who, they are the American Association of University Women, AAUW. I know because my grandmother belonged to that group, and they just organically found out about the index, and they've been using it for like a year and a half, and they've trained all of their members throughout the state on the Dignity Index. This is a subculture. This is what we're talking about. We have religious organizations and different church groups have picked up the index, and they want to use it in their congregations. So that's the movement. We want people to be a part of the movement. We want you to sign up for our newsletter and read about the movement so that you can see you're part of something big and get ideas from other people. Here's what they're doing in Idaho with the PTA. Oh, we could do that here. Here's what they're doing I was in South Carolina. Oh, here's what they're doing with their who was it I talked to the other day? It was someone in their legislature on their education committee. Oh, this is what they want to do. You start to have all those ideas buzzing around, and then you can't help but feel like you're part of a network, and then we start to shift the culture.
So I know that you might have heard me say this today, but so last fall, the superintendent of public instruction in Idaho put they're updating the graduation requirements, and one of the things that they're updating is adding a digital literacy course. And so last fall, as they had, worked through like in the summertime, like what that was going to look like, a few members of the Department of Ed then did this, travel thing around the state to kind of share with, people, community members about this. Not that many people show up for that, which is unfortunate. I wish more people would show up and give their, input. I really do. We need it. But so anyways, I decided to go because I was like, hey, I'm state PTA president. I've got this podcast. I do want to know what's going on. So I go and I'm listening to the thing, and they get to the point where they want to add digital literacy and they want to create good digital citizens. And I'm listening to the chief of staff for the superintendent talk about, they hadn't come up with content standards yet, but what this was probably, hopefully they were going to look like. And I raised my hand and he knows me and he was like, yes, Alexis.
Of course he does.
And I was like, are you taking suggestions? Because I have a couple. And he was like, yeah, let's hear them. And so I went through and I was like, I think you should add the anxious generation to this, or at least read it. Like that's going to be, that's going to help inform you. I think, this thing right here. And then I was like, have you heard of the Dignity Index? And he was like, no. And I was like, please write this down. I think that we need the Dignity Index in a lot of places, but I would love it if you would include it in the content standards specifically for digital literacy, because this is going to help kids understand how to score their literal speech online.
That's right.
And so he was like, yeah. And so anyways, I followed up like with an email and stuff. I was like, hey, by the way, Greg, like, here we go.
That's perfect.
Take it. And but I think something that's important for people to understand is that there is value in being persistent.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
I know that just because I said it once to them in a traveling meeting and I saw them take notes and I sent my email, that does not mean that it's going to get included. I have to follow up for me, in a respectful way. I want to be respectful because I want them to take this seriously, right? And so this is like, when I think about like, what can we do in our local communities? This is like one of those things like you talk about, like join the movement. And then you're going to start to recognize.
You see it.
You see it. Not only do you see the speech, but then I truly believe that people start to recognize where they can share it, where it can then be shared with other people, because it's kind of like one of these things for me that I think this is one of the things, like when I, saw you a year ago, is that like, it resonated with me. I loved it. And when we love something, at least for me, I guess I can only speak for myself. When I love something, I want to share it with other people.
Yeah.
And that's what, to me, this movement means.
Well, on the digital literacy piece, let me just say that when we did the pilot project, so we tested this, we worked with the University of Utah researchers to do a reliability and validity study on it. And so we had young people, undergraduate and graduate students, we trained them to score speech, political speech at first. And within a day or two after the training started, they would come back in and say, oh, I had to take down one of my posts yesterday. Another young woman say, I had to stop listening to a podcast, and it's my favorite podcast. And she said, I couldn't wait. I was excited to do this project because I couldn't wait to stick it to those, Republicans or those Democrats, the other side. And she said, I was listening to my podcast and I heard the language, and they were saying, those senators are, bad or whatever. She said, oh, that made me uncomfortable. Then they said, those guys are evil. And she said, I started to squirm. And then she said, they are pigs. And she said, I just had learned about a one. When you start to call human beings something that is not human, they're pigs. She said, that's a one. And I could not believe I was supporting that podcast. She said, I had to unsubscribe. And so think about when people hear this language, you teach students what that language looks like and have them score their own social media, not just what they post. I mean, what are you listening to? What are you supporting? And then it's like, oh, I get that. Okay, now what are you posting? We have this little idea that we're going to be playing with on social media where we want you to check yourself. So I could call you up, Alexa, and say, Alexa, get out your phone right now. what are the last 3 things you posted? I want you to score them for me right now in real time. And then you'd look at your card and you'd go, okay, that was a 5. That was a 6. Oh, I think that one could have been a 4. I'm not sure. We want people to check themselves. But when you learn that language, it's really easy to do. And again, when you use contempt, it's hard to see it. When you see it, it becomes hard to use.
Like I've been sitting here and I have a friend who has a podcast. It's called The Ranch, and he, it's like focuses on all topics in Idaho. And you actually just met him. It's Matt, and he,
Nice.
he's the host of that. It's awesome. And then, he's the producer of my podcast. So he and I have a lot of conversations, and the premise of the Ranch podcast is that it's an opportunity to be as unbiased as possible for him as the host. He tries to be as unbiased as possible. And he brings in people from the entire spectrum, far right, far left, and everyone in between. And so the Idaho PTA actually sponsored our location. We used our location in Boise to say, we want you to be close to the Capitol, Matt, and we want our lawmakers to be able to come in and talk about their bills that they're talking about. Get that information to our local community members in a way that they've never had it before, a way that they can actually hear it directly from the people, and not just in a newspaper, the interpretation or anything like that. And this was something that I heard just even about civility many years ago, was that when we start getting to know the person, then we start just even details about their lives.
That's right.
Right? Like it's harder to treat them with contempt when we see them as a human being.
Yeah.
And so what was super interesting was that, oh, sure, there's always going to be haters online, right? Sometimes he would share something that was more right. And then the left would go, well, you haven't even shared the left perspective yet. And he's like, yo, dude, give me a second. I am only one person. But what was interesting for me was that as Matt and I were having these conversations, there would be some times where I'd get really, worked up over a political thing kind of. And regardless of if he agreed with me or not, he'd be like, yo, Lex, take a beat. And what was interesting was there was one person in particular I'll never forget he had on his show. And it's someone that I have gotten really frustrated with, politically, seeing this individual's decisions, just raises my blood pressure, I feel hot. I feel hot. And he released a clip of this person. And I did not even agree with this person's sentiment in the clip, but the way that this person was simply expressing their perspective, I was like, whoa, I see this person differently today than I have for the last 5 years. And that to me was super profound. And to me, that is the beauty of the Dignity Index.
And when we do workshops, we actually have people practice. We give you a scenario and we say, okay, group number 1, you're going to give me a 3 response. And that's easy because we all come up with, you guys are stupid, you're idiots. Okay, you guys are going to tell me a 5 response. How would you handle this if you wanted to score a 5? And then you have to start thinking about, how would I put forward my position with 5 language? And then the tough ones, you guys are 7s. How would you respond to this conflict at a 7? And then people talk about it, they work through it, and they figure out ways to say what they mean and hold someone accountable. But they do it with dignity language, with 7 language, or with 5 language. And you can't always be an 8. Sometimes it's just not even appropriate. Sometimes the 5 is as good as you can get, and that's okay. 6 is better. Depending on the conflict, 7's fantastic. But we have people practice, and once you start practicing, it becomes easier to do. And I love what you said about when you see people differently, because then you're kind of seeing that humanity, which is the 8, right? And then when you see that, it's like, maybe there's a better way. I can disagree with you.
Yeah, I love that. So now at the end of every conversation, we do a takeaway thing. A friend was like, Alexis, I listened to this podcast, and when you start yours, you really should do this. I love this idea. And so this is the premise. I mean, that's the idea, that at the end of the conversation, each one of us are going to take away something from what we've from the conversation. What are we taking away from the conversation? I usually go first because sometimes my guests are like, okay, Lex,
Please go first.
I need to see you in action. I need to see you in action. So one thing that you said in this conversation has really struck me, which is not just it's like I've known the Dignity Index for, a little over a year
Mm-hmm.
now. I love it. And I've started, to like, I feel like I've started to incorporate these things, and the language resonates with me. And something that you said in this conversation was something that I think I have observed and I've tried, but you put it into words, which was, yeah, we see this and we act, like the goal is to, judge the speech and ourselves, and we're going
Mm-hmm.
to see it in others. But what if we stop participating in the
Right.
things that we're expressing, those 4, 3, 2, and ones? And what if we started interacting with the 5, 6, 7s, and 8s? And the thing that like really struck me was recently we just had this More Social, Less Media
Mm-hmm.
event a week ago, and one of the speakers said, I can't remember what the statistic was, but it's like off the charts, like 75% of the salacious titles and the clickbait thing, those and the negative posts, those get shared. Maybe it was like 75% more of the time
Mm-hmm.
than the ones that are just like putting out quality information or like sharing the thing, or, like maybe some of those things that are more like a 5 and a 6, definitely, 7 and 8. And when I heard that, I was like, you know what? It's so important to be intentional. This is like one of the things, like, this is one of the purposes of the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast, is to be intentional about trying to share. It's not just like sharing the good news, it's like sharing the realities of life,
Right.
right? It's like not just about being happy, it's sharing the realities of life. And like when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's the thing. Like for me, that's like the next step is I don't want to engage with those types of things, because then that means in some level for me that I'm supporting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to
Yeah.
support the the news entities or the podcasts or the individuals or the people in my community who are working to bring people together, to work through that conflict, to create that beautiful thing. That's what I want to spend my time doing. And that has to be intentional work.
Yeah.
That's what I'm taking away from this
And I
conversation.
love that. And just a quick comment on that. We do ask people to challenge contempt. Sometimes people say, you just want everybody to be nice and just ignore and all that. They're bad. So I'm going to turn. And it's no, 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 no. We need you to challenge contempt. Sometimes you can do it outright, but you can do it in a way that is not returning contempt for contempt. But what you just described is another way to challenge contempt, is to just not participate in it, not click on that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not join that group, not follow that podcast. That's another way to challenge contempt. I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is just a reaffirmation of, again, I think the hunger for for a new way of managing conflict. And the fact that people want to be, not just be a part of it, but it's like, what's next? And people ask us this all the time, and we've really been struggling. Part of it's a capacity issue. We're a nonprofit, so I spend a lot of time fundraising and speaking, and so part of it's capacity, but part of it is like, what's that thing that you can do? What's that thing when I leave the PTA meeting or when I leave a city council meeting, and they say, "What can I do?" I've been struggling with, what is that thing I can give you to do? And so what I'm taking away from this conversation are some more ideas. You've given me some ideas on some pretty concrete takeaways of things that you can do. We've already talked about boot camp. I call it a boot camp because I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah.
Bringing people say, "I'll come to Salt Lake. Please train me."
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of our ideas. But you've made me think of a couple of other things that will help us shape something that's a more active way for people to engage in the movement. Instead of, we have a pledge, and that's fine. People take a pledge that says, as an American, I love my country, and I know that, that there's no democracy without healthy debate, and there's no healthy debate without dignity. That's fine, but it needs to be more than that. And seeing your enthusiasm and talking to some other people today, and the one woman that you mentioned, she pulled me aside at the beginning and told me about her, we call them dignity moments, where she said, I decided to try it. And she told me the most beautiful story. I'd love to share those stories. I'd love people to have a way to share those stories. So maybe your listeners can chime in with some ideas too, but you've got me really thinking about the next steps for the movement. This really is a movement.
Amazing. I am so looking forward to watching this unfold and being a part of it. And I am like, I just like want to share like right now that for people, one, the Idaho School Boards Association, I told them, I was like, hey, they're coming.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it would be so cool if you came to this thing because I think it would really benefit you. And they were like, oh, yeah. So they came today. And after you left, they were brainstorming about how to incorporate you and the Dignity Index into their annual convention, which is in the
Nice.
fall. And I was like, this is what you do. This is how you get on her schedule. Like, get on early. Like,
You better call me soon.
yeah. And then there was another nonprofit that I had just kind of, it's like these connections that we have with people.
Yeah.
We're all connected. We're all connected in different ways. And so I was like, hey, they're coming. And she was like, we don't have the budget to send. We promise we won't eat the food. Like, can we come? And I was like, you can eat the food.
It's PTA.
Yeah.
We welcome everyone.
Yeah. We like
everyone belongs.
Yes, exactly. Please come. We want you. You can eat our food. And they were like, the email I got back was like, thank you so much. I'm sending these people. And I was like, yes, this is like so awesome. And so like, I know for me as like the host of the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast, I want people to reach out to me and to reach out to you
please.
and find you on Instagram and social, like I think you said you're on Facebook, the Dignity Index, and I'll definitely share all those links and, clips will come out. If you see the clips and it resonates with you, share it on your stories.
Please.
Like, text it to somebody, right? Like do these like very simple intentional things make such a big difference when we add them all together. It's like when you're in like a beehive and all the bees are contributing their little teeny tiny little bit. But when we all are together, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, go to our website. It's dignity.us, dignity.us. And you can click just to sign up for the newsletter. And last week's was so inspiring. I'm going to send you the link because I would love to have the people that were in the room today, I would love to have them read that newsletter. And we talk about the movement in the newsletter so you can see what's happening all over the country. That's one thing that is very concrete thing people can do. But we also have a YouTube channel that's called The Dignity Movement. I was very audacious. I'm calling it a movement.
I love it.
4 years ago, and we've got more and more clips of things that are happening and speeches. And Tim was speaking. Tim Schreiber was at Harvard and gave a beautiful speech at Harvard. And we've got just different clips of some of the young people that get engaged. And it's fun to see, and it's easy to share. It's really easy to share those on social media too. So.
Thank you. 14 months after I saw you for the first time, we got you up here in Idaho, and just a deep, heartfelt gratitude,
Of course,
for coming up here and sharing this message. I know that it wasn't because of me that like you came up here.
It's pretty much because of you.
But I mean, but it's just, it's kind of like, when you want something so much, you want something so much.
Yeah.
And today when I saw the room was filled, and Idaho PTA hasn't had a room filled for a long time. And when I saw the room filled, and then when I watched people watch the first workshop and the second workshop, and then everyone got their lunch and they sat and they listened to you, like that was a moment for me. Like just as Alexis Morgan, that was a moment for me. And so I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that you came.
Beautiful.
Thank you for coming and sharing this message. And I am like very happy and excited to be a part of this movement going forward.
We welcome you and need you in the movement. So thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a fantastic day.